We may have heard more and more these days the term limiting belief, and that you can change your life, sometimes completely, hugely, by eliminating or lessening the number of limiting beliefs and the strength of them. Here's my take at present on what a limiting belief may well be. I think the cognitive behavioral therapists started in the 1960s with the idea that your thinking influences your life markedly, including your emotions. Dr. David D. Burns wrote, for instance, around 1980, the book Feeling Good, trying to address how your thinking affects matters such as, he called it, depression and other issues too, including anxiety. And he and other theorists brought up the idea of core beliefs and how these had an influence on everything else we thought in general. I would say perhaps that the rest of ideas in our lives are much more fluff or incidentals compared to your core beliefs. Often taught by society or certain persons in it and then perpetuated for a period of time, depending on the period in history or what country, and the economics of the time too, including any shortages of resources in general. So I think then if we're talking on the order now of the term limiting belief, this was brought up not just by cognitive behavioral therapists in the 60s and onward. Rational emotive therapy too comes to mind, perhaps preceding immediately cognitive behavioral therapy. We're talking perhaps this limiting belief concept. Now, a term we might not like so much in certain circles of psychiatry outside of cognitive behavioral therapy might have been that so-and-so has a delusion. Now, I think that word has been subsumed by more palatable terms like limiting belief or core premises more and more, and that these are typically not biological in nature. These are things either we wish to be true, and so we latch onto them as a core belief, if you will, a premise that can be inaccurate, or they can be taught to us by certain people for their own ends, or to include being taught to us for the making of money, kind of like marketing a core belief that's inaccurate, that some people know we have a wish to believe, and they know this, and it's marketed to us then, often to great profit, and perpetuated perhaps for decades or centuries, especially in certain countries or regions. Now, I like what Chris Do, D-O, said on one of his shows on his YouTube channel, The Futur, F-U-T-U-R. He claimed that delusions are lies we tell ourselves. And I don't particularly like the word lie, but I do kind of think that a lie in this sense might be something we wish to believe to be true, but to expand it a little more, a premise that's incorrect and repeated to ourselves and sometimes marketed to ourselves to perpetuate it, unfortunately. Now, Shinn, S-H-I-N-N, I believe, from the 1920s, referred in one of her shows to this or that as being a log jam, and referred to logs flowing down a river to a sawmill, and if one log or two were in a position, it could jam everything up, and someone would have to get in there and unjam the whole thing. What if we're talking then of a bad premise as being a log jam? So I might throw in a few extra tidbits here of my thinking that to simply say someone is delusional because they have a core belief, maybe as we call it now, limiting belief that's incorrect. Or to say that so-and-so is lying about this or that. First, I would ask a couple questions. Is it by choice, or is it determined by the laws of the universe? And secondly, is it, quote, a lie or a delusion or limiting belief if you're simply inundated by sources everywhere saying that that's the case? And it taking quite a bit to escape that kind of thinking. For instance, if we inundate ourselves by watching news, TV programming influenced by Hollywood or other, often with financial motives involved for certain people, or even a desire to see others sometimes suffer by our soaking up certain beliefs, premises that are incorrect. I think this is something to ponder. For instance, in the moonshine business, in the 1920s, 30s, radiators from cars were used as part of the processing of moonshine until such time as it was discovered there was lead that was in the radiators contaminating the alcohol being manufactured. And when this was put in public view, this generally was corrected and no longer used in the processing of this alcohol, moonshine, what have you. Was it then a lie or a delusion or limiting belief to say that it's perfectly safe to use a radiator when it seemingly was the cutting edge idea, or no greater idea was out there, no knowledge available of the downsides thus of using a radiator? It being thus one thing to consciously know something is incorrect and yet put it out there as fact, much more terminable as being called a lie, although I don't like using the word lie. On the other hand, if we say something or believe something that is seemingly common knowledge, seems to me, especially in our day and age of much chaos, much pressure, much shortage of time, that we take what's off the shelf as granted to be fact. And this includes what we call limiting beliefs, unfortunately, I believe. But to recap in just a few seconds, I do believe once again that core premises are behind much suffering in our lives and much stymieing of growth and correcting of certain structural problems in societies, and can hold us back greatly. Hence the concept of the Dark Ages in the Middle East. There must have been certain limiting beliefs, bad premises that held them back. And on the other hand, around 500 AD, was it, the Greek civilization briefly flourishing immensely from arguably the opposite, a seemingly low level of these bad premises. Now, some might say about a person that, oh boy, they sure came out of nowhere, or this is unbelievable, it can't be true, that their lives have shot up like a rocket. Well, I would suppose it's probably due to clarifying and eliminating one or more core beliefs that were incorrect. Just like if you had tuberculosis in the past, or some chronic pneumonia condition, or bronchitis, and you took an antibiotic, maybe it was just created on the market. There were no antibiotics, for instance, before a certain point in time. Wouldn't this antibiotic then correct a massive infection and restore you to much better functioning in life? You might say the antibiotic was a corrective against a bad limiting belief in that sense, and freed you to much more of what your potential could be without this lead weight around your neck, you might say. and some others around you might be flabbergasted to progress you could then make. But wouldn't it be the same thing analogous to being laid up in bed with tuberculosis and then being able to take a drug now on the market that cured it and restored you back to work? I mean, this could even be something that could have hobbled the greatest of leaders or industry giants. Even Steve Jobs, say, could have been laid up and totally incapacitated by what you might call an illness such as tuberculosis or a massive pneumonia condition. And yet, through a simple administration of a drug, such as an antibiotic, he could be restored back to performance quite astounding. I believe thus this is the power of eliminating or trimming one or more limiting beliefs that I call bad premises that can restore us back to our potential that we theoretically have, I believe. Even to the extent that these people then probably being quite unusually rare statistically in eliminating all of these, being called either enlightened or super geniuses, if I might add, applied to the correct directions. One last note then. I think this can apply to people we see in history who seem to have come out of nowhere, including, as it comes to mind now, Eleanor Roosevelt, who did not have the easiest of childhoods, many of us don't, but arguably too was called by various people, maybe her parents too, as ugly and of no potential. The same being said maybe of Einstein and Edison. Maybe these people found massive progress in that one or more of these bad premises were kicked out of their heads, so to speak, or largely so, rendering them back in service or massively potentiated to their true potential, while not hampered with a ball and chain or lead weight around their neck, with one or more premises that are incorrect. Call them limiting beliefs, if you will.